Welcome to Veterans Stadium.
In this episode of The Frieze, spring training is likely to be delayed because MLB and MLBPA are not close to a deal. Nonetheless, the Yankees have a lot of work to do when the lockout is over. We'll take a look at the current depth chart, the entire pitching staff, the state of the farm, and who could be available during the post-lockout mini hot stove. Later, Jack Curry, Yes Network analyst, joins me to discuss his new book collaboration with Yankees legend Paul O'Neill. I'm Derek, and this is The Frieze. All right, in case you haven't been paying attention to baseball during the lockout, and judging by the number of views on this channel, you haven't, I wanted to catch you up on some of the things that have gone on with the Yankees prior to lockout, and look ahead to what's sure to be a very short and very chaotic roster building process over the next few days and probably weeks. We got to start at the bottom of your screen with Aaron Boone. He re-signed with the Yankees on a 3-year contract. This surprised a lot of people, given the Yankees' underperformance in 2021. But alas, he is back, and he's got some new faces with him on the coaching staff. The Yankees dispensed with hitting coach Marcus Timms, as well as third base coach Phil Nevin, and are going in another direction. Dylan Lawson has been hired to become the Yankees' new hitting coach, coming up from the Yankees minor league system, where the Yankees minor league hitting philosophy has yielded excellent statistical results over the past year or so.
What we're doing is we're just identifying which launch angles, which range of launch angles allows a player to be more successful.
There was a little bit of drama when Eric Chavez accepted an assistant hitting coach role with the Yankees, but then left the team a few weeks later to become the hitting coach for the Mets. Gone from the roster is Corey Kluber, author of the Yankees' only no-hitter of the 21st century. He signed with the Tampa Bay Rays, division rival. Tyler Wade was sent packing to the Angels, as was fan favorite and Bronx native Andrew Velasquez. This has left the Yankees with a bit of a depth issue at shortstop that they're going to need to resolve. Also gone from the roster, popular Yankee Clint Frazier, who was released and signed with the Chicago Cubs. The Yankees have signed a number of non-40-man roster players, depth pieces such as ex-prospect Manny Banuelos, ex-Brave Ender Enciarte, and infielder Jose Peraza. Notable free agents include Anthony Rizzo, acquired from the Cubs at the trade deadline, did a nice job with the Yankees, and he's spoken fondly of his time with the Yankees and wants to come back. Brett Gardner also remains a free agent. His option was declined, but there's a very real possibility that he could return to the Yankees over the next few weeks. At first glance, the Yankees' depth chart looks okay on paper, but when you consider underperformance and injuries and age, there's a number of areas that the Yankees could use some improvement. Let's start with Gary Sanchez behind the dish. He was tendered a contract, and barring some kind of crazy move, he's going to return as the Yankees catcher. Luke Voit has been hitting the gym hard this winter and hopes to be hitting some baseballs hard again with the Yankees in 2022, but the need for more left-handed hitters in the lineup is obvious, and Voigt's questionable injury history means that the Yankees might want to upgrade at first base. Gleyber Torres had a down year offensively once again in 2021, but a late-season move from shortstop back to second base seemed to re-energize him, and I assume he'll return to form at least partially in 2022. I don't know if he'll ever be the 2019 Gleyber, but somewhere in between last year and 2019 should be good enough. Gio Urshela has to be considered the Yankees shortstop right now, just in absence of anyone else by default. With the new utility man and top 10 prospect Oswaldo Cabrera serving as his primary backup, the Yankees have a couple of prospects in the system that are developing. More on that in a minute. There's a strong chance that the Yankees will make a move at this position before play resumes. Again, more on that later in the podcast. Third base is DJ LeMahieu or Gio Urshela right now. Depending on how things shake out, there's a good chance that DJ goes back to the super utility role for which the Yankees signed him prior to the 2019 season. Again, a lot of balls in play right now, and you never know how things are going to work out. The outfield is anchored by MVP candidate Aaron Judge in right field. He is in the final year of his contract. I expect huge things from him. Giancarlo Stanton did a nice job out there at times in 2021, and I think the expectation is that they use him as Judge's primary backup and allow Judge to get some time at DH in order to keep his bat in the lineup when he needs a day off. Aaron Hicks remains under contract in center field, but he's mostly been injured, and the past few seasons he hasn't been the same since he had his Tommy John surgery. Estevan Florial didn't hit much in AAA, but he can really run him down out there in center field, and right now he's probably the fourth outfielder. In left field, Gold Glover and 38 home run man Joey Gallo. I think he's a lock to play better this season if the Yankees hang on to him. He hit 160 with the Yanks, but he should be more comfortable his second time around. At least that's historically what's happened. Miguel Andujar is still kind of floating around out there as a man without a position. He's got an electric bat, but doesn't really play defense particularly well anywhere. I think he's a lock to be a National League DH if that rule gets adopted. And Kyle Higashioka is the Yankees' backup catcher headed into 2022. All right, on to the pitching, which, again, at first glance, looks pretty good, especially the bullpen. Let's start in the rotation, though. The rotation is headlined by Garrett Cole, who, if he stays healthy, probably has a couple of more really dominant years left in him. Luis Severino probably slots in as your number 2 stuff-wise, but he's an enormous X factor. He hasn't been able to stay healthy for the last couple of years running, but he looked like an absolute beast out of the bullpen down the stretch. He's noticeably stronger. I have a good feeling about Sevy, but I don't know how many innings he's going to be able to throw. Jordan Montgomery is kind of the modern-day Andy Pettitte equivalent. He's not quite as good, but he has the potential to be really good. I feel very comfortable with him in the number 3 or number 4 spot in the rotation. Nestor Cortez is another crafty lefty who doesn't overpower you with his fastball, but he put up a sub-3 ERA, and he's going to be just 27 years old this year. He's pitched out of the bullpen. He's pitched out of the rotation. How does he fit in? Jameson Taillon is coming off of ankle surgery and could be out until May. Still, he's very solid and was really good during the middle of the summer last year. Domingo Germán has electric stuff, but durability issues might force him into the bullpen or into a situation where he's kind of a swingman, where he pitches out of the bullpen and as a starter occasionally. I contend that his stuff plays up out of the bullpen, and if you put him in that 5th, 6th, 7th inning slot, he can be really, really effective. Luis Gil is another gigantic X factor. I proudly proclaimed him the real deal after he dominated in each of his first 3 starts last year. He's a few tweaks and maybe one more plus pitch away from being a legitimate top-of-the-rotation type starter in a year or two. Clark Schmidt is a first-round draft pick with a mid-90s fastball and an impressive breaking ball, but unfortunately, he's had command and injury issues. He still has a very high ceiling if he can overcome those issues, but it's going to take some work. And finally, Davy Garcia was an absolute disaster in the minors last season. The guy who was once compared to a future Pedro had an ERA just over 6. The Yankees tried to correct his mechanics. He was throwing across his body, and they tried to fix that, and unfortunately, it didn't take. So it would surprise me if he ends up in the rotation, and it would not surprise me if he ends up as part of a trade package at some point. And that would be a shame because he was really fun to watch in 2020. The bullpen is highlighted by one of the most well-known relievers over the last decade, Aroldis Chapman. His fastball was still over triple digits again last year, and his split-fingered fastball was unhittable. Chapman was especially unstoppable with spider tack, so we'll see how he adjusts to the slightly tackier baseball if MLB follows through with implementing that idea. Chad Green was a bit overused last year, but he's been mostly reliable for his Yankees career, and I think he's been replaced by Jonathan Loaizaga as the Yankees' primary setup man. Loaizaga, by the way, absolute breakout year last year, some of the nastiest stuff in baseball. Love how he throws that hard two-seamer in on the hands of righties. Lucas Litke was a surprise who came out of nowhere last season, and he was really solid. Really good curveball. Love his moxie. He's a veteran. And Wandy Peralta was a midseason pickup who throws a wicked changeup. I like his poise out there. Mike King, after years of being a top prospect, finally put it all together out of the bullpen. At times, he had some injury issues, but he's always had a really good sinker, and he finally learned how to command it last season, and he picked up Corey Kluber's curveball, so watch out for him this year. He could be a monster. Clay Holmes is another guy that we need to keep an eye on. He's got one of the hardest sinkers in the business and absolutely flipped a switch after coming to the Yankees last year. Albert Abreu had some ups and downs last year, but I think he's another guy that's a breakout candidate. Last year was his best stint in the majors so far. You like the confidence growing with each appearance. The Yankees re-signed Joely Rodriguez this winter, and honestly, I don't know what to expect from him. He seems kind of funky and difficult to hit against, but I want to see him for a full year before I form an opinion about him. And finally, Steven Riding's one of the most exciting arms on the Yankees 40-man roster. 6'8", throws 100 miles an hour. He also had some injury issues, but he's my sleeper pick to have a breakout 2022. All right, so now you know what the Yankees have. Let's talk about the areas in which they need to improve. If you consider how well the rest of the American League East played last year, 4 teams with 90-plus wins, the Yankees are going to need some serious help if they want to reconstruct this roster quickly. And that's why I think it makes more sense that there's a major trade or two out there somewhere. You can't win without a shortstop, though. And although the Yankees do have some good prospects at the position, it's generally believed that they all require at least a little bit more minor league seasoning. The 2 biggest shortstops on the market are obviously Carlos Correa and Trevor Story. Both of those players would be a nice addition, but you don't want to block your youngsters, and so I don't see a long-term contract for either of them. It's not out of the realm of possibility that Trevor Story takes a 1-year deal, but Carlos Correa just hired Scott Boras, so I don't see him taking anything less than a massive multi-year deal. It's a conundrum for sure, and the Yankees fans have been talking about it for the entire lockout. We're about to find out what's going to happen. The Yankees also need some more left-handed bats. It was obvious to anyone who was watching the games last season that if you had a tough righty who could pitch inside off the plate to right-handed batters and elevate the fastball a little bit, get them looking up and in, and then go back to a breaking ball low and away, they could pretty much just carve through the Yankees lineup. They did add Joey Gallo and Anthony Rizzo midseason, but as we said, Rizzo is a free agent. And if you bring him back, that means you got to trade Luke Voit. Gallo basically did nothing but strike out or hit into double plays, which was unusual for him. He did walk some, he did hit some home runs. But another option that's a little bit more contact-oriented would be nice. Matt Olson fits the profile, and he is available. Oakland is planning to move him. Oakland's planning to move several of their assets. And this could be that area where the Yankees make the blockbuster trade. You might see multiple players go back and forth. That's something that's been rumored throughout this lockout. Brian Reynolds is also available for discussion, reportedly from the Pittsburgh Pirates, but his price is just going to be astronomical, and you don't want to empty the farm. You also might need to unload Aaron Hicks if that happens, and that's not going to be easy with his contract. Japanese star Seiya Suzuki was rumored to be a possibility, but he's also right-handed. He plays mostly left field, and his availability could be hindered by the lockout. As with any season, the Yankees are also looking to add more pitching. You can never have enough pitching. Carlos Rodon, coming off of a breakout season with the White Sox, is available. We've talked about that many times on this channel. Luis Castillo from the Reds has been rumored for over 2 years now. Clayton Kershaw is available if the Yankees want him. One thing you might see the Yankees do is go with more arms that can throw a couple of innings, and they might use a strategy similar to what the Tampa Bay Rays used last year that was so successful. Bottom line is the Yankees need a shortstop. They probably need a center fielder. They could improve at third base. They could improve at first base. And obviously you can always improve the pitching. So the Yankees have a lot of areas where they need to get better and fast. Otherwise, prepare yourself for a bad season. All right, so before we know who we can go out and get, we have to know who's on the horizon internally and who on the farm could be considered a valuable trade asset. Anthony Volpe is a first-round pick. He's crushing it in the minors. I think he's doing more interviews lately, so the Yankees are promoting him. He's not going anywhere, except the Bronx, possibly by 2023. He's why I think the Yankees do not sign Carlos Correa. Number 2 prospect is Oswald Peraza, another shortstop. He's probably a couple of months away from being able to take over the shortstop job at Yankee Stadium. His value has never been higher, but like we said, Volpe seems to be the favorite in 1 year anyway, so Peraza could be a piece that gets moved. But I'd be perfectly fine with keeping him and giving him a shot at shortstop this season. I'd rather watch him struggle than sign some broken-down veteran or block the kids with another massive contract. Number 3 is the Martian, Jason Dominguez. He slipped after 1 year in the minors, but I know that the Yankees are still extremely high on him. Great article by Brian Hoke this winter about why he's an anomaly. Look it up. Assuming that he stays with the Yankees, tune in all season for the Martian Tracker, updated every week once the minor league season begins. The number 4 prospect is Luis the Real Deal Heel, who very well could make the Yankees' 5-man starting rotation, especially if someone gets hurt or traded. Luis Heel is also somebody that is going to be high on other teams' lists in trade packages. Number 5 is Austin Wells. He's a catcher who's had some arm issues, but he's a good hitter, and he showcased some pretty good speed and selectiveness last season. The Yankees are light on catchers who are big league ready, so it'll be interesting to see how quickly they move along Austin Wells. Hayden Wesneski is number 6. He's got a really funky delivery, but he's somebody that just makes hitters uncomfortable. He throws hard, he's got a lot of arms and legs everywhere, gets a lot of sink because of his arm angle. Think Kevin Brown, only with more brain cells. Number 7 is Trey Sweeney, a shortstop prospect that the Yankees drafted in the first round last year, who already made an impact. Watch for him to move up the system quickly. He's very polished. He was a college player. He's got a really good swing. He's left-handed. And one thing that scouts say stands out about him is his arm. So it wouldn't surprise me if he moves over to third base should Anthony Volpe take over at shortstop. The number 8 prospect is Oswaldo Cabrera, a switch hitter with power who profiles as more of a second baseman than a shortstop. He worked really well under Dylan Lawson's hitting system, so it would be interesting to see what he does as his personal hitting coach next year in the Bronx. He's probably going to be the new Tyler Wade, sort of a utility player that moves all over the infield, but a switch hitter with power. Number 9 is Luis Medina. He's just a big, strong who throws the ever-loving out of the baseball. Big curveball, 102-mile-an-hour fastball. I call him the Terminator. And number 10 is Ken Waldichuk. He's a funky lefty with a lot of movement and a pretty good swing and miss repertoire. He's someone who could move up quickly if the Yankees have some injuries in the rotation. I also want to mention Everson Pereira. He didn't make the top 10 for Baseball America, but he's got some serious power. He hit 14 home runs in his first 27 games at High A Hudson Valley last year, 20 overall home runs in 49 minor league games. I've got him ranked as my number 4 personal prospect, so don't be surprised if other teams ask about him. Of these players, I think the most likely to become a star is Anthony Volpe. Knocked it out of the park with a first-round pick, while the highest overall ceiling is still Jason Dominguez. He's still the strongest, the fastest, a switch hitter, and the youngest. And my sleeper pick on the offensive side is Everson Pereira. On the pitching side, the pitcher that I think could surprise people the most is Ken Waldichuk. Lefties generally play up at Yankee Stadium. And Hayden Wesneski, just because of his wicked movement and the arms and legs everywhere, I think he would be nasty. The players most likely to be moved in deals, in my opinion, again, just my opinion, a YouTuber, would be Oswald Peraza and Luis Heel, just because other teams are going to want some value back for something of value. And these are two guys that look like they could be very good in a year or two. Right now, their value is high, and if the Yankees are even wavering a little bit on these guys, now's the time to move them. But with any prospect, you just don't know.
She's gone. How do you like that?
A great philosopher once said, "You can't predict baseball, Susan." And again, this is just for fun. I am just a YouTuber, and not a very smart one at that. I have precisely 0 inside sources, but having watched how the Yankees operate since 1987, here are my predictions for the major additions Brian Cashman will make between now and the beginning of the season. At shortstop, the Yankees are going to go with a stopgap solution. Isaiah Kiner-Falefa is one of the best defensive players in baseball, and even though he doesn't hit for a ton of power, he still hit .271 last season, and he's been displaced by Corey Seager in Texas, so he could be an easy get. He had a 3.7 WAR last year. In center field, the Yankees sign Seiya Suzuki. We know that Joey Gallo has the ability to play all three outfield positions, and that Suzuki can play the corner outfield spots, but also has the skill level to play center field. Judge can play right field and center field. Stanton can play both left and right. By signing Seiya Suzuki, you don't have to give up the prospects to get Brian Reynolds, and it allows you to have an interchangeable outfield for a couple of years until the Martian is ready. I feel good about the Yankees rotation, but I'd feel a lot better with one more big arm. I think that guy is Carlos Rodon. I love lefties in Yankee Stadium. He throws 99 miles an hour. Didn't throw a ton of innings last year, but can't argue with the stuff. Absolutely filthy. And the biggest get this offseason will be Matt Olson. The A's need to move him. They need to move his $12 million, and the Yankees want him and need a big left-handed bat. Brian Cashman says he has some latitude to go higher with the payroll. Olson is a good defender. I think he would hit 40 home runs in Yankee Stadium if you put him between Aaron Judge and Giancarlo Stanton. I think it's a no-brainer. So I'm pretty nervous because you're the most famous person I've talked to since I met Dan Marino in 1993. So you excuse me if I botch this.
And I'm not famous. Dan Marino's famous. Where'd you meet Dan Marino?
My brother owned a card shop and he came to do autograph signings, and I was kind of his errand boy for the day. I would go get him waters and and things like that. So
I'll tell you my quick Dan Marino story. I'm obviously a baseball guy, not a football guy, but my wife and I, we like to go to St. Kitts. It's an island in the West Indies. Beautiful island. We've had a lot of friends there. So one day we're at this restaurant and Dan Marino is there. I never drive when I'm on St. Kitts because it's the other side of the road. It's the steering wheel's on the other side of the car. If I want to have a couple of drinks, I don't want to be driving around these roads. So we had a taxi driver who we use all the time. He's a big football fan. They wait for you in St. Kitts. They bring you to dinner and then they just wait for you. So I went to the cab to tell this guy, Leo, that Dan Marino was in the restaurant. Oh my gosh. You would have thought that it was a 5-year-old kid meeting Santa Claus. He was so excited because on a small island like that, they don't see a lot of celebrities. And Dan Marino was very, very kind. He was very polite.
He was a great guy. When I met him, I was a 12-year-old kid, and he was just so polite to me. So great professional. But again, thanks for being so generous with your time. I have to say, I'm a big fan of your work, your professionalism, your writing. Back to the Derek Jeter book in, I want to say it was 2000. I read it when I was in college.
Oh, wow.
Back at the height of Derek Jeter's popularity. I think that was the year he won the World Series MVP and all that stuff. And your commitment to your craft is just phenomenal. And you're an inspiration to those of us that are trying to, become the next generation in Yankees coverage. So,
well, it's kind of you to say that. And I looked at your YouTube page real quickly, and you're obviously committed to doing this right yourself. So keep grinding away at it. I mean, Jake and John Boy, I was the first person they ever interviewed. And that could have been you, however many years ago that was. So find your niche. People recognize hard work and knowledge. And I'm not a big scream from the mountaintops kind of guy. If I give an opinion on TV or here or in writing, it's usually because I've done the research, I've talked to people. It's an opinion that hopefully has some value to it. It's not, oh my God, I can't believe they didn't trade for so-and-so.
Yeah.
But I applaud you for figuring your way out to grind through this. And I hope there are better things in store for you.
So I want to get started on your book because I'm really anxious to read this thing. Paul O'Neill is one of my favorite all-time players. I used to mimic his batting stance and his little leg kick in the backyard. Tell me a little bit about this project, how this got started, and what you've been working on with Paul.
Derek, I have known Paul O'Neill since 1993, so I've probably had 1,000 conversations with him about hitting. First, when I was a reporter for the New York Times, and now as we work together at Yes. And I approached him last year and proposed the idea of talking to him about his hitting theories, his hitting principles. I had done a book on pitching with David Cohn, and I told Paul, I think we can do a similar version with you just about hitting. But the thing that's interesting to me about Paul is that it's not just his hitting theories in this book, which are all in there. And he loved the line drive swing with a slight uppercut at the end, which was the Ted Williams advocation of hitting. But we talk about Pete Rose and Lou Piniella and Joe Torre and Don Mattingly and Derek Jeter and Bernie Williams. So each chapter almost threads its way around another personality. Paul was in the major leagues 8 days, and Pete Rose gets the all-time leading hit. He breaks Ty Cobb's record. So you talk about somebody who has lived a lot of baseball history. Paul O'Neill is that person, and we tried to bring that to life in this book.
Yeah, I mean, he was just so surrounded, by greatness. Yeah, he was part of multiple championship teams, obviously played with a number of Hall of Famers, the first ever unanimous Hall of Famer. Did he give you any insight other than his affinity for umpires and water coolers into what made him such a competitor, what made him such a good player over his career?
It's a great question, Derek. And if I didn't do that in this book, then I have failed. But I know that we did do that because Paul grew up in a big family. He was the youngest brother, the youngest son. So he was constantly chasing his older brothers. They were older than him by between 2 and 8 years. So his father had a nice big backyard, and they turned that into their little ball field. And here was Paul O'Neill, 5 or 6 years old, trying to keep up with the kid who was 13 or 14. And I think that competitive fire started at a young age for him. His dad told him when he was 6, you're going to make it to the major leagues. His dad also told him his swing reminded him of Ted Williams. So Paul is very honest about his temperament and his fiery nature and how he became who he was at the major league level. That personality and those actions, they were born in that backyard where his brothers weren't going to let him play. They called him the baby. Weren't going to let the baby play unless the baby was halfway decent. And so he was constantly having to live up to what his brothers had already done. I think that's where you get that from. And in terms of the water coolers and the umpires, I think that's all part of that. I think Paul drove himself to be very, very successful. He thought he should get a hit every time up. And I know every player goes to the plate thinking, I want to get a hit here. Paul really believed he should get a hit every time.
There's something too, growing up with brothers and how that makes you better at sports. I mean, I wasn't Paul O'Neill, but I had 3 older brothers, and just to compete with them, I mean, I had to learn to hit the faster velocities that they were throwing, and I had to learn how to pinpoint my pitches. Otherwise they would take it, into the next yard. But I mean, that's great to hear that someone was able to, take that sibling influence and channel that into a lifetime in sports. It's just amazing to me. Did you talk to any pitchers about what it was like to face Paul O'Neill? Because I go back to that Armando Benitez at bat in the World Series, where Armando Benitez at the time, I'm sure you remember, was as intimidating as they come because he would throw at you, and he threw 100. Now, that's not necessarily a situation where he would throw at somebody, but O'Neill was up there fighting, fouling pitches off. And for anybody who hasn't seen the at bat, it's on YouTube. What did the pitchers have to say about facing Paul O'Neill?
Well, first of all, it's interesting that you brought up that at bat because we really dissect that at bat against Benitez in the book. And we talk about how Paul was in survival mode for that whole at bat, just trying to stay alive, flailing at pitches to try and foul them off and try and get to a mistake from Benitez or end up getting a walk, which he did end up getting. And for all the hits Paul had in his career, over 2,000, almost 300 home runs, he told me that a lot of times when fans engage with him, they want to talk about the Benitez at bat, which wasn't even a hit. It was a walk. So that is definitely covered in the book. Obviously, David Cohn is a colleague of ours, so I've talked to him about Paul O'Neill. I talked to Al Leiter about Paul O'Neill. One interesting person whose input is in the book is Jesse Orosco, because as a lefty, he had mano-a-mano duels with Paul O'Neill year after year. And Paul was actually 0 for his first 17 against Jesse Orosco.
Oh, wow.
And it drove him nuts. So we chronicle that whole back and forth and what happened and why it happened when Paul finally broke that streak against Jesse Orosco. And kind of a little bit of an oddity, there's also some input that I got from Tim Wakefield and about how Paul approached facing a knuckleball pitcher. And I don't want to give it all away, but I will tell you this. When I told Wakefield what O'Neill was trying to do against him and how he approached him, Wakefield said, "I've never heard of any other major league hitter who took that approach." So there's definitely some interesting feedback from pitchers in there.
I would have liked to have heard from Norm Charlton on his thoughts, because he was kind of the guy that whenever the Yankees were in Seattle, it was always Norm Charlton coming in to face Paul O'Neill with a man on second, you know.
We talk about the at-bat in 95 too, Derek, where he takes Charlton deep. And he was friends with Norm Charlton because they had played together on the 1990 Reds. So though there might not be an actual quote from Norm in the book, his presence is felt in the book.
You know, that 95 series, people forget about how good Paul O'Neill was in that series because the Yankees lost and because most of the attention was on Don Mattingly in his first series. Bernie Williams had a good series in 95, but O'Neill had a couple of big home runs. I remember one in particular in game 2, and then he hit one, I believe, in Seattle as well. Might hit 2 in Seattle, but that was a great series. Just the beginning of his clutchness with the Yankees. But speaking of clutchness, you also did a book with David Cohn, one of the other clutch Yankees, one of the clutch pitchers of all time. From a psychological point of view, what are some similarities between those guys that made them sort of the fierce competitor that are able to, sort of shut aside all of the New York hoopla and succeed under pressure?
It's a great question, Derek, and I think you have to start with some of what we've already spoken about. David Cohn had brothers as well. So he was this competitive, he called himself a runt. He was this competitive little runt from a young age. They're both from the Midwest. They were actually both drafted in the same year, 1981. And I think something that we've kind of forgotten about because they went on to excel in baseball. They were both very good in other sports. Cohn was a terrific point guard. O'Neill thought that he might actually end up playing college basketball more than he thought he would become a professional baseball player. But I think we're a product of our environment and in our family. And in your most formative years, the people that you spend the most time around are going to be the people who help you form into who you become. So I think with both David and Paul, it was competitive family situations. I think it was parents, I don't want to just say fathers, but parents who were very involved. But in both instances, David's father catching his bullpens in the backyard, Paul's father throwing him BP, they were teaching their sons knowledge that they didn't have at that point. Cohn's father taught him to drop and drive delivery, similar to Tom Seaver. O'Neill's father guided him towards that swing that is on the cover of the book right here, starting out level but elevating into an uppercut, as I said, the way Ted Williams used to do it. So I think that's where all of that comes from. And Derek, I got to know both of these guys covering them, and you used the right word. They were fierce and ferocious competitors, and I think that rubs off on your teammates. I think those 90s Yankees, I think those guys were all grinders, and they did not accept second best. They wanted to win, and they performed every day in a way to try to get themselves to that point.
It's interesting because, the way one generation of player feeds into the next, you had Mattingly, feeding into the Jeters and the Bernies. And then you had, Paul taking kind of the leadership role, after Mattingly left. And then you get, just this crop of young guys, Posada, Rivera, and they all have this fierce competitive. And I just wonder how much of it feeds off, from one generation to the next. It's just, I miss that time. I miss that era of baseball.
Paul told me a story about Jorge Posada, which again, my job here is to tease the book and promote the book, but he told me about something that would happen at the end of every meeting that Joe Torre had. That was sort of emblematic of who those players thought they were. And it was a great story that I'd never heard before, but essentially it's what you and I are talking about. It was, we are not going to let anyone take this away from us. We are going to go out there and work harder than them, perform better than them, and we're going to win those games. Now, you grew up in an era where you got to see the team that you follow win 4 World Series in 5 years. That's an unbelievable blessing. So when you say you miss it, I understand that, but we may never see that again. We may go 100 years before we see that again.
I got the rings right here, the replicas. Just a couple more questions for you, and then I'll let you go. I know we're almost out of time. I wanted to find out if you have any other collaborations in mind, because as a creator, I know that when I finish writing something, I've written a few books. They're not anywhere near as good as yours, but I write every single podcast that I do that's not an interview, and I write every single video. And I know that as soon as something is, quote, in the can, I start thinking about the next thing. Have you started thinking about your next project and who would be a good subject?
I actually have, and it's not just an individual. I am going to write a book about the 1998 Yankees. That's my next project. So,
sign me up first in line.
The O'Neill book is essentially done. You get to the point when you finish as an author, there's some final edits. We have to pick out the pictures that are going to go in the book. We've got to write our acknowledgments and who we're dedicating the book to, but it's 90 to 95% done. So my next project, and I'm working with the same editor, Sean Desmond, and the same publisher, Grand Central Publishing. It's going to be a book on the 98 Yankees. It'll come out in 2023, obviously a 25-year anniversary book. And Derek, there were 38 players who played on that team, and my goal is to speak to 25 or more. I mean, some of those guys were bit players, only played a handful of games, but I want to go back and get them to remind us of the greatness of that season. And I will definitely tackle the question of, can this team or can that team be called the greatest of all time?
Well, I mean, the term juggernaut doesn't get to be used very often. That team was certainly a juggernaut. And the fact that they were able to win once they got to the playoffs and complete the World Series championship separates them, I think, from the Mariners, who a couple of years later won 2 more games actually during the regular season, but they couldn't get by that Yankees core. I wanted to put forth one suggestion for a potential topic while he's still possibly open to it, and that's John Sterling. I think a book on John Sterling's stories, obviously you have access to them. I just, first of all, I would love to hear him narrate the audiobook and immortalize his stories coming from his voice for all time. But I just don't think that he's gotten enough credit for. He's been around here this entire time. He's been with the Yankees since '89, I think, doing the voice. I grew up listening to him when I was a kid. My older brother, used to sneak me out of my bedroom after my parents put me to bed, and we'd go listen to John Sterling and Michael Kay on the radio in his room, this little old timey radio. And that's how I became a Yankee fan. And if you're searching for topics beyond 98, I would just love to put out there that John Sterling would be a great subject.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. And it's a surprise that someone hasn't done that previously. And I agree with you that I'm not an audiobook guy, even my own books, but that would be an audiobook that you would want to have, because you would want to hear John telling the stories that have made his career as special as it has been. That would be a fantastic book, and I think Yankee fans would devour it.
So I've got 3 more off the wall kind of questions since we got 5 minutes. I always try and throw some random stuff at people. I got Brian Hoke with some of these. If you get up to bat at Yankee Stadium, just a random, in a dream maybe, what would be your walk-up music? What's the music that identifies and pumps up Jack Curry?
Oh, that's an easy one, Derek, because I've been asked this question before and I've thought about it. Mine would be London Calling by The Clash. I grew up loving The Clash. That was my favorite band of all time. I was fortunate enough to see them a few times. My brother and I saw them once in New York City at a place called Bond's Disco that is now a restaurant. And I was able to climb on stage after the concert and was trying to grab a drumstick or something. It didn't work out. But The Clash would be my number one choice. Growing up in Jersey, I liked Springsteen too, but The Clash and London Calling, that would be an easy choice for me.
All right, we're gonna make it a little harder now, a little more off the wall. You worked for the New York Times for 22 years. A couple of years ago, they broke a story about UFOs. Are you a believer?
Wow, I was not expecting this. I'm going to say I wouldn't call myself a non-believer. I almost think it would be crazy to think that it's just us swirling around in this cosmos. So I'm going to say, though it's not a topic that I dig in on much, and if you handed me a book about UFOs, I would say thank you to your face, and then it would gather dust off to the side. I'm gonna with a lowercase yes, I'll say yes on the UFOs. Did you ask Hope that one? Did Hope get that one?
He's had almost the exact same answer. He said, in a universe this big, it's hard not to believe that we're the only one. And I agree, and that's why I asked that question. I always am curious to see what people come to on that, because some people they really into it, and it's kind of a recurring subject on our channel.
It's a good question. It made me think, and this is way before your time, and it was even way before my time. I watched it in reruns and repeats, but I was a big fan of the show The Twilight Zone.
Oh yeah, I love it.
Sci-fi show with Rod Serling, and he had a lot of episodes that involved that type of an alien, somebody visiting from another world. So out of respect for Rod Sterling's writing, I'm going to stick with my yes answer.
I love The Twilight Zone. I watch it every New Year's Eve.
Yes.
Great thing about The Twilight Zone is that it had to be scarily written, because you didn't have all the special effects and stuff. So you had to come up with really creative stories. And some of those stories get retold by modern media, and you just recognize that, hey, that's an old Twilight Zone episode.
Yeah, his writing was tremendous. The way they cut the shows was tremendous, and the way they cast the shows, the actors that they had on those shows always fit in perfectly.
And final question, this is the toughest question anyone can be asked, and I'm anxious to hear your thought. Do you think that there's a meaning to life? And if so, what is it?
I do think there's a meaning to life. I think it would be a sad world and a depressing world if we didn't think that there was a meaning to life. I would say that the meaning to life, my wife and I were just talking about this yesterday. I would say that you've got to figure out a way to enjoy every moment that you have on this earth. At the same time, I think you have to do what you can to make those moments enjoyable for others. I think it's a good day if you have something to smile about, but it's an even better day if you've given someone else a reason to smile. So that would be my meaning to life answer.
Jack Curry, a gentleman and a scholar, thanks so much for joining your first appearance on NYY Recaps. Hope to have you back at some point this season.
Thanks, Derek. I really enjoyed it, and I'm sure I'll be talking to you again soon.